cherry-picked and hand-selected to fit into a store of a certain size.
But just because the web now enables us to choose from a vast selection, that doesn't mean we actually take up the opportunity. Faced with overwhelming choice, consumers tend to stick to what they know.
In practice, what's become apparent is that we still huddle together in groups that confirm our existing beliefs. Now, for companies who want to sell us things, manipulating that little aspect of our psychology means massive financial returns.
Some of the chance and some of the spontaneity has to be ironed out of the system for it to work. I mean, it's not a randomizer. I mean, it's doing something very deliberate. It's doing a kind of collaborative filtering, as it was called early on, and it's finding patterns, and it's trying to use those patterns to sell you something.
Recommendation engines are very good at figuring out what people like me would do and telling me what that is, so I can then find out what people like me do. I can become much more like a person like me.
We are 100% about trying to improve our consumers' enjoyment of movies. And we help them get the movies that they're going to laugh at most, cry the most, love the most. It's all about pleasing the consumer. And if that narrows, that's fine. If that broadens, that's fine.
Recommendation engines, by telling me what people like me do and encouraging me to be like a person like me, they help me to become more prototypically one of my kind of person. And the more like one of my kind of person I become, the less me I am, and the more I am a demographic type.
It may be too early to judge the long-term cultural impact of recommendation systems, but I feel that there is a deeper and more pressing concern about how we pay for a free web and our massive use of online retail. We are actively contributing to vast databases of information about ourselves. 16 years of web commerce has utterly transformed what privacy means in the 21st century.
Wind beneath my wings. 60 single men. Fear that spouse contemplating cheating. How to kill oneself by natural gas. Numb fingers. Dog that urinates on everything. Foods to avoid when breastfeeding. These are real people's intimate thoughts. Just a tiny fragment of searches made anonymously by people who believed that they were using their computer in private. In 2006, the American computer giant AOL released a file containing every search made by 650,000 of their users over the previous 3 months. Each user was identified only by a numerical code. But one journalist at the New York Times was concerned that these outwardly anonymous searches in fact were so personal that they would reveal the identity of the searcher. How long would it take to unmask them?
One kind of popped out at me, I think in part because it had a lot of searches that were obviously local searches, like, you know, landscapers in Lilburn, Georgia was the one query. And that's not something you're going to look for if this is some town, you know, across the country from you. Chances are you're looking for a local business.
The user was known only as number 4417749, and this person's searches soon became much more intimate.
There were a lot of searches for medical ailments, you know, effects of nicotine. There were some things about depression, paranoia, a whole bunch about paranoia. You know, we sort of thought this was maybe an older, lonely man with a lot of health problems.
David was honing in on his prey. Along with the regular searches of businesses in Lilburn, Georgia, a lot of searches also revolved around the surname Arnold.
I went onto an online phone book and looked up people with that name. There were 11 of them, One of them lived on Shadow Lake, and I went back and looked in the search queries. It said Shadow Lake subdivision, Gwinnett County, Georgia. And I said, you know, that's got to be the person.
After just a few hours' work and using nothing other than the searches and the telephone directory, David had identified his target. She was a 62-year-old woman called Thelma Arnold.
She was pretty shocked and angry about this. She said, you know, I had no idea someone was looking over my shoulder. You know, this is like my whole life is on here.
Thelma explained that many of the searches for medical information were not for her, but for her friends who didn't have access to the internet.
People are just typing in questions that they would probably never ask another human being, and yet, you know, here they are at their computer, and they think that the internet is the source of all knowledge, and they have no idea that anyone is recording this stuff that they're searching for.
Think back to the search terms that you've stuck into the search engines over the past week or so. It's likely that you can't remember most of them. But as the AOL story shows us, it's these incidentals that, when pieced together, can give us a surprisingly revealing picture about who we are.
There are so many things that people do on the web now which are very, very intimate. In a way, if you know what somebody's browsing on the web, you find out whether somebody is gay and wondering about coming out, looking at other people's stories. Somebody belongs to a religion that really is very different from the one around them. There are all kinds of very, very sensitive things that people do on the web.
This massive ability to communicate with other people all over the world, this massive ability to access all kinds of information and services and so on, all of that positivity has a dark side. And the darker side of the web, to some extent, includes the ability of those behind the screen, those who are providing this space for you to monitor you.
The average person seems very pragmatic about it. As long as it works, and as long as all the laws are followed, they seem perfectly happy to share personal information to make their experience better.
Eric Schmidt is right. We consumers of the web voted with our feet. We're complicit in the deal for free. Our complacency is illustrated by a little-known but quite revealing slice of web history. In 2005, a non-profit organization called the Attention Trust tried to reassert our ownership of data that we put on the web. It sounds like a no-brainer, doesn't it? The kind of thing that would be taken up by millions. I went to meet one of the founders, Seth Goldstein, to find out what happened.
There's all this attention data that we're producing now online. We're spending more and more of our time online. We're spending more of our time doing social things, online. How can we claim ownership of it?
So they created a piece of software that anyone could download and plug into their web browser that would automatically store a record of our activity on the web. Crucially, we owned this record, not the Attention Trust and not Google or anyone else, and only we could exchange it with others on our terms. The result? Well, very few took up the technology. Attention Trust failed.
Do you think that we're perfectly happy in this trade that we're engaged in?
I don't think people know how they feel about it. So when you say perfectly happy, it's like, well, they've looked at all the alternatives and like, no, I'm happy. I think if you say they're perfectly dumb about it, dumb and happy, or sort of happy and naive, yeah, that's probably more like it. It's just not that important to them right now. There's no clear cost.
Are we simply sleepwalking into surveillance rather than thinking about the amount of information we give up on the web and how that might come back to us later?
There are a lot of sort of social critics who say this is exactly how you devolve into, a fascist state or a socialist state or a dictatorship, which is you invite it in and ignore the consequences, and all of a sudden it's 1984, and I think there's some merit in that.
An Orwellian future may seem a little far-fetched, but as masses of data about us is stored up on the web, the issue isn't so much who owns the data,